Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today, and today we're going to be talking about news and AMA. Ask me anything about cocoa or chocolate. It is the August edition of the Pod Save Chocolate news and AMA episodes. So before we jump into that, just two quick bits of housekeeping. The first one of which is no matter where you're watching today, no matter where in the world you're watching today, you can go into the comments, whether it's the live chat on YouTube or the comments on LinkedIn or Facebook. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from. Just give me a quick shout out. I will get that shout out up on screen and acknowledge you, share with everybody who's watching, the people who are watching. And if you have a comment or a question about anything that I might be saying during the course of the episode, you can go get those into the live chat or into the comments. I will get them up on screen and I will do my best to answer the questions. And if I can't answer them during the live stream, what I'll do is I'll put the answers in the comments, the discussion to the post for today's episodes. And with that, this is a reminder that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. And here is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. You can go click on this green button in the corner up here. I'm logged in, it says account. If you're not logged in, you're just visiting, it will say join. There's always a free membership, but of course there are premium memberships if you'd like to take advantage of them, and all support of the Chocolate Life at all levels is greatly appreciated. It keeps what it is that I'm doing on the air, and I thank everybody who is a member. So for this episode, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post, and this is the post for today's episode. I'm going to get rid of that. So here's the post for today's episode, the August news and AMA. It's a run of show. It's an index. It gives me an outline. This is outlined, not scripted, of what it is that's going to be going on today, what I'm going to be talking. And it also gives links to watch the episodes in the future if for some reason you're coming at this. But the links are here so that you can refer to them during the episode if you have a spare screen, or at any point in the future, you can follow along, you can listen and follow along and actually go and take a look at what it is that I'm looking. So I'm going to start off this episode, as I've started off most episodes for over a year now, of the news and AMA, taking a look at pricing. And so the first place we're going to go is the International Cocoa Organization. Here are, no thanks, I don't want to get updates, but this is a place that you can go to take a look at what the International Cocoa Organization publishes for stats on the price of cocoa. And one of the reasons why this is different from other price listings is that you're going to get the listings in three different currencies. You're going to get the price on the London futures market in pound sterling. You're going to get the price in the New York future market in US dollars per ton. You're going to get the ICCO daily price in US dollars per ton. And you're also going to get the daily price in terms of euros per ton. And so this will give you a really, really quick snapshot, because looking at something in one currency doesn't always give you a real good feeling for what it is for what pricing is. Now, one of the reasons why this is important going forward, and let me go and make this a little bigger and perhaps a little easier to take a look at. One of the reasons why I think this is important is that that hedging on the commodities exchange, not the commodities, the currency exchanges, hedging money, right? So you're buying in one currency and you're selling another currency, you're taking positions in one currency, maybe short or long, is one way that very large companies are able to play the game. You don't have the resources to get into futures trading in money. And so it becomes more challenging for you to be able to compete with very, very large companies, many of whom will have trading desks which are dedicated to trading foreign exchange, Forex. So having a feeling for where prices are can be really, really helpful in understanding. So am I going to make this trade on the London exchange today because I have futures and it's beneficial for me to buy in this currency, is something to think about. And this is part of just the overall idea of paying attention to what's going on in the market. So taking a look. So I subscribe to a service called barchart.com. This is the bar chart. This is a futures look, which is focused around a chart, right? And so here's a chart of prices on the exchange from barchart.com. It's futures. It This particular page will show you what the last traded cocoa price was and what's going on. So it's up 224 basis points, but right, so it's letting us know. So yesterday there was a rally in cocoa prices, and today the rally on cocoa prices, they're trading lower today on some long liquidation pressure after yesterday's 3% upward spike to a 2-month high. So it's giving you some of the dynamics. This is what the analysts in the market are talking about when they go and take a look at what's going on. And so I just want to do a quick shout out, hey, to Chef Jeffrey Gardner of Marsata Chocolate in Torrance, California. It's a long time since you've been here. So Chef, thanks very much for joining me today. It's good to have you back. I've been following you a little bit on Facebook. I know that some of the challenges you've been facing recently, and so glad to have you back. I know that you're in your workshop this morning, working hard to get chocolate out the door, and so happy that you're listening to what it is that's going on today. So why is it important to take a look, right? So you can find out what cocoa is doing today. You can find out what sugar is doing today. The price of sugar is going to have an impact on things. You know where things are. If you know much about trading, you can figure out where things are going, but you'll find out what the market is thinking about, what is influencing the price of cocoa. If you're making chocolate, the price of cocoa is of supreme importance. It's your primary ingredient, what you're doing. So you want to know what it is that's going on. And taking a look at the futures market will give you an idea about where things are going. Again, in the future, this is an historical chart. It goes back from May to August. It'll let you know what's going on. And you can see the general trend has been, for the last couple of months, it's been floating slowly down, getting to sort of, 6,800 or thereabouts. But within the last couple of weeks, there's been this general upward price pressure. So good to know that's what's going on, even if you're not in a position to trade foreign exchange. So let's go take a look at a different version of this same graph. This is another company, different set of analysts. So cocoa futures climbed above $9,200 per ton, the highest level since June, driven by rising supply risks in the Ivory Coast and newly imposed U.S. tariffs. So we're starting to see the impact of tariffs on the price of cocoa. So you can see that there's been a fair amount of volatility. So this is in the last year. I mean, we've seen, up here, it's up at, 12,605 in December of 2024. We're at $8,700 today. We can go take a look and see what the volatility is by changing the spread in this. So now we're looking at the last 6 months. Now we're looking at the last month. And so while we do have this sort of downward price pressure that we can see since the high recently, if we go take a look at the last month or so, what we can see is that the price is in fact floating up. And so that, again, something that is good to have an understanding of. And if you're in the chocolate business, sitting down the first thing Monday before, as you're getting ready to open the doors, or the last thing Friday as you're closing everything down, maybe both, just taking a quick look at these kinds of resources will give you an idea of where cocoa is going, why the analysts think cocoa is moving the way it is, and just give you an idea about where things are. Now, there are other kinds of reports that you can go to on a website like barchart.com, which will show you what the futures market price is going to be over the course of the next couple of years. And so that's also another report that's worthwhile taking a look at. What I will do is I have that in previous months. Not entirely sure why I removed it from this one. What I will do is I will go and put that more comprehensive futures chart back onto this page after today's episode, so you can see, okay, what is the market? What are people betting on? What are big companies betting on in terms of futures pricing? So it's really important. So what's the TLDR and all this kind of stuff? Tariffs, the UDR, and no one has a clue as to where things are going, right? That's the quick takeaway. But one thing that did hit the news wire yesterday after I published this, it came to my attention that there's a big US based energy company called Hartree Partners. They're energy and commodities trader, apparently in negotiations to acquire an old and storied French agro-industrial firm, Touton. Touton, it handles nearly 10% of the global cocoa trade. And Hartree entered soft commodities last year with the purchase of another commodities trader, ED&F Man. People who may or may not know my history know that I met a guy by the name of John Kehoe, who is currently the sourcing director at Guittard here in the United States. But I met him in Ecuador in 2003, and he had just left ED&F Man in 2003. So there is my connection to ED&F Man. And ED&F Man is an old player in sugar and cocoa. So what Hartree Partners is doing is it's taking a position in soft commodities, right? And it is going to become a significant play if the merger goes through, if the acquisition goes through. So it turns out that the current owner of Touton is nearing retirement and is actively exploring what's going to happen to the company. So he's looking at succession plans. And is looking at selling the company. And so this is a way for a company that's entered the soft commodity space to become a significant player in soft commodities very, very quickly by buying a company. So the ICE exchange is now requiring those trading in cocoa futures. So this is a connection to the charts that I was showing you. To put up large amounts of cash as collateral against potential trading losses, which is really, really an important thing to consider. And here is a link to a story that was on Reuters that showed up on yesterday that talks about this. Now, unfortunately, I've turned my VPN off, even though I've got an ad blocker in the browser. It's not doing a really, really good job. When I do the VPN on, I do a much better job of blocking the ads. But if you want to learn more about what's going on with the Hartree Partners acquisition or negotiations to acquire Touton, this article is a good place to start to give you some of the dynamics and what would happen. It's from being a small player in cocoa trading to become a large trader, 10%, right, with a single acquisition represents. And this is the concentration of power that we need to be very, very careful of when we think about cocoa and the resistance to change in the cocoa market. So, because how do you be ethical and be sustainable a business at the same time? And one of the things we've learned is that economics eventually is going to trump ethics, pun intended. It's going to trump ethics going forward. And that's where I wanted to start today. As we start every one of these episodes of the News and A&M episodes, is to go take a look at the price of cocoa and some of the dynamics and major changes that are happening in the cocoa market. From there, we're going to go talk about a range of topics which are sort of central to a new series of articles. So I'm writing a series of articles on the changing landscape of cocoa sourcing. And I've been thinking about this and speaking with people, corresponding with people about what this changing landscape looks like and what we should be focusing on. And who are the kinds of players, not who are the kinds, which entities are having an influence on ethical sourcing practices and what that means in broad terms. So who decides, what does it mean to be ethical? Who decides what's fair? Lots of topics around that. What is the history around that? And, many people don't know, for example, that the history of protests against illegal labor, slavery in the cocoa supply chain go back to the Quaker free produce movement in the late 1700s. So it's really quite fascinating to look at the history of cocoa through this other lens. And the first article is going to show up sometime in the next week or so. And there's going to be 3 of them, one in August, one in September, one in October. And then also in October, I'm going to be doing a podcast, an episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, where I'm going to stitch all of these things together. But the first thing that I wanted to do on that is to go talk to this article. This was the I'm running quickly because I'm talking fast. Even though I am in Arizona, I spent a long time in New York. In New York, especially New York City, the metro area is known for fast talking. Um, so this is the post for this past Friday's episode of Pod Save Chocolate, in which I talked about the International Cocoa Initiative and their most recent report on what are the root causes of illegal labor in the supply chain. And it turns out that they say that the root causes of illegal labor in the supply chain are low household incomes, high inflation, and limited access to things like education, healthcare, child protection services. We might also say so food security, water security. There are a bunch of things that we need to be very aware of when it comes to. This is a complex, multidimensional problem, and it turns out that one of the challenges in the ICI report is that they acknowledge, right, that what they're doing is they must invest more in local monitors, right? The more capable they are, the better we track symptoms, we track impact, and ensure no child falls through the cracks. So what they're saying here is that they're not actually addressing the root causes. There's nothing in the ICI report that says, how do we go and fix or address low household incomes? How do we address, they can't address inflation, right? But they don't mention it, right? And what they're doing is they're saying, oh, even though we've identified these root causes, what we think the answer is more monitoring and more reporting. More monitoring and more reporting is going to solve the root causes of child labor. And the answer is no, that's not what's going on. That's not what's going on. And it's important to understand, historically and connect it back to this new series of articles that I'm writing, is that the International Cocoa Initiative was founded in response to the Harkin-Engel Protocol, the signing of the Harkin-Engel Protocol back in 2001, in which the industry acknowledged that they had a real challenge associated with illegal labor in the cocoa supply chain. And I'll get into that. Look forward to this next article, or the first article in the series about ethical sourcing and the changing landscape of cocoa sourcing over the history. So the ICI, International Cocoa Initiative, you can go take a look who the partners are, who the members are, where the funding is. You can go take a look at the inadequacy of their annual reporting, where they're getting their money, what they're spending their money on, where they are spending and who they are spending their money on. Just completely inadequate reporting in their annual reports on that, which is a clue, right, about what's going on. We actually, if you give money, you donate money, your money is given to these initiatives, you need to demand good reporting. These people are going to demand really, really, really good reporting from the farm up to them, but they don't demand really good reporting from them back down to the farm, right? And to the other people who rely on them, right? People like me who are going, what the heck is going on? We can't find the information. I could not find any place, for example, where the salaries of the C-suite executives who live in Geneva, I don't know what they're getting paid. I don't know what the country directors are getting paid. There's no public information available. It's a non-governmental, it's a nonprofit organization. They may be Swiss, and the Swiss may be really strong about privacy rights when it comes to finances and things like that. But I don't think this is a place where those kinds of rules and regulations should be followed, because we need to know what our money is paying for or not paying for. So this has been on my mind, for the last week or so, as I've been thinking about where I want to go with this article and changing the direction with input from other people saying, hey, Clay, that might be interesting, but this doesn't really address the issues associated with the changing landscape in cocoa sourcing. Let's, focus it on ethics and things like that. Illegal labor, how has the model of sourcing changed through the expansion and exploration of cocoa, outwards. So it is the economic and cultural imperialism of the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, and the Portuguese, particularly when it comes to the Americas and the Caribbean. How are we seeing those, where they're coming from, what's driving them, what is justifying what it is they're doing. So what's justifying slavery, for example? How does that all connect with things, right? And so in my feed, I subscribe to maybe a dozen newsletters, and so I'm getting maybe 6 or 7 or 8 newsletters a day from various sources, probably 50 or 80 a week that I need to go take a look at. And this came in today or yesterday from Confectionery News. They're talking about the cocoa crisis, the main causes. So this was initially published a week ago on the 5th of August, right? But we're going to go take a look at what do the people at Confectionery News think about the main causes of the cocoa crisis. So they give a summary of it, right? And what do they do? Talk about, well, prices have become unprecedentedly high for the last 18 months. Unpredictable weather patterns linked to climate change have been a major cause. And this is absolutely wrong, right? We know that we are going to have El Nino and La Nina weather patterns. We know that these things are going to happen, right? These are not unpredictable. Perhaps the extent to which they might occur in one part of the year or one year or another, that may change. We know that we have seasonal changes in weather patterns, but there is a lot of work that's being done to track changes in weather patterns. This is not unpredictable. They could have predicted that at some point, oh my gosh, we're going to have a confluence of unforeseen events, sort of a black swan. Well, we've never seen it before, therefore it's never going to happen. It's, they're burying their heads in the sand and going, nah, 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 just, nah, putting their fingers in theirs and go, la, la, la. No, the confluence of events that led to the rise in cocoa prices, which is primarily due to the lack of systemic investment in the cocoa supply chain, particularly in West Africa, right, is a leading cause of why we are here. Didn't do a good job of predicting climate change, right? We know that it's a thing, and we've been, we just haven't been paying attention to it, and we haven't been investing in the farms, right, and the farmers, right, to be able to make them more resilient, right, overall. So it's a huge problem. There are 1.8 million cocoa farmers just in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. That's a lot of cocoa farmers. That's a lot of land. That's a lot of people. And how do you go about investing in the farms and the farmers to make that kind of change? But there's also an increase. So because of low incomes, farmers have been forced to keep older trees. Oh my gosh, which have lower yields. And whose fault is that? It's the fault of big cocoa. It is the fault of big chocolate. It is the fault of the Ghanaian and Ivorian governments that control prices, right? That's the reason why there's not enough money in the system. We need to talk about, when we talk about sustainability, there are 4 aspects of sustainability. We have environmental sustainability, right? Which means that the farms need to, and the resources associated with the farms, the supporting and supported ecosystems need to be husbanded in a way, they need to be managed in a way in which they're healthy and thriving 100 years from now. So when I talk about environmental sustainability, that's what I talk about, right? The farms they're supporting and their dependent ecosystems are managed so they're healthy and thriving 100 years from now. We then have economic sustainability, and economic sustainability is, well, there's, the farmer has enough money, right, to be able to meet the objectives of environmental sustainability. So if the farmer is not being paid enough for their labor, they're not being paid enough for the goods. If they're not receiving sufficient income, they can't take care of their trees. They can't do the pruning. They can't do all of the maintenance which is required in order to keep the trees healthy. And the trees become less productive. So the less cocoa you're growing on the same amount of land, you need to expand the land, and there's pressure on to deforest or to move from less productive lands to new productive lands. This could have been solved by systemic investment, or could have been addressed. I don't know if it could have been solved, but it could have been addressed by better investment in farms and farming. So that's part of the economic sustainability part of the equation. The third part of it is social sustainability. The farmers live in communities, and these communities need to be healthy and thriving 100 years from now. And what do the communities provide? a place for the kids to go. They support education. There are all sorts of things that living in a community is good for. The farmer, all on their own, is dependent on what? I mean, to whom can they rely, right? And so we need to have healthy and thriving communities that the farmers live within, right? And that's a third leg of the sustainability, three legs of that tripod, right? But keep in mind that all of those exist in the producing country. So the economic, environmental, and social sustainability legs of the tripod, legs of the chair, are in producing countries. But in order to be able to have the money to be able to fund all of the work done to make sure that the environmental, economic, and social um, obligations are met, we need to have sustainable markets. And sustainable markets are outside the producing country. So the sustainable markets are in the United States, they are in Europe, they are in the cocoa consuming countries, right? Not the countries where cocoa is produced. And so the cause of this, right, that's not the cause. The farmers have been forced to keep older trees, which leads to lower yields, is a symptom. The cocoa swollen shoot virus is a symptom, right? And there has not been the investment in resources to be able to address it, to address the root cause. So this is a problem. Gold mining in Ghana has impacted yields, farming soil health with chemicals from the process. That may be true, but it's not a cause. It's not a root cause for the decline in cocoa production. So you can go and take a look at this, the effects of climate change, weather patterns, blah, 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 the virus, aging trees, gold mining. These are not the main causes. These are symptoms of an underlying lack of systemic investment in cocoa farming. But what I want you to do when you go look at this in confectionery news is to go take a look at the articles which are in the sidebar. Global commodity supplies at risks as extreme weather escalates. Right, we're going to talk about this next one. Mars bets on CRISPR. How to beat cocoa spikes with compound chocolate, which is another thing we're going to talk about in this issue. Making a meaningful impact through ethical and sustainable cocoa production. This is a paid content. European quality, right, chocolates, whatever European quality chocolate means. But notice this is IRCA Group. IRCA is a division of ECAM, which is the big Italian manufacturer. There's an IRCA supplier. There's an IRCA factory here in the United States. Why is that good? Well, you're not paying to send cocoa beans to Europe and then paying additional tariffs on the transformed price of the cocoa beans into derivatives and chocolate products by bringing them into the United States. You're just bringing the cocoa beans into the United States and you're transforming them here. So you're not paying the increased tariffs on higher value products. So anyway, go take a look, right? This is not the main causes. It's not the root causes. They're blaming, as I said, they're blaming everybody else, but big cocoa and big chocolate. It is the system. It is the players involved. It is the fact that the system is based around extractive politics, extractive economics, extractive agriculture, and it's not based around a more regenerative or restorative system. For there to be truly regenerative agriculture, we need a system that values regenerative economics and a political environment that values those things, right? It doesn't exist in the world of Ayn Rand libertarian laissez-faire capitalism, where an actor has no more obligation to anybody else in the system, right? As long as that's the way things work, right? And we can go back to Mario Kart economics, which was a previous episode of Pod Safe Chocolate. The whole idea of Mario Kart economics is there are interventions in the system, right, which aid the people who are at the back of the pack and slow down the people who are the front runners, right? And let the other people, the people who are at the back of the pack, catch up. If you are a devotee of Ayn Rand and her form of, fully libertarian, laissez-faire capitalism, you have no ethical responsibility. You have no moral responsibility to any other actor in the cocoa chain. It's you're out to do what's best for you, right? And that's a challenge. And it is a challenge in a system, especially that is based on centuries of economic and cultural imperialism. Okay, I've been thinking about this a lot, and that's what I'm going to be talking about, right, in these articles on the changing landscape of ethical sourcing, right? So the other thing that we've got going on is this is again an episode of Pod Safe Chocolate recently. Is there have been rumblings? I mean, there are many, many people in the EU Parliament who said, "I'm sorry, we're not ready for the EUDR. Push it back." Right. And there are people who are saying, well, we don't grow cocoa here in Europe. Why are you penalizing us? You should be penalizing the people in countries where cocoa grows. It's like, I'm sorry, this makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, we have the European Cocoa Association who's saying don't delay, right? The implementation date, which is December 31st, 2025. Don't delay the implementation date. It's going to go into full force on January 1st, 2026. But the ECA is not the ministries of agriculture in European countries. It's not the people who are sitting down voting in the EU legislature, in the European Parliament. So we've got a case of buyer's remorse, a law of unintended consequences. We didn't know how much data was going to be generated. We didn't develop the systems which are going to be necessary to process this. And so we're going to how do we go about and address the fact that we've created a monster and we don't know how to control the monster. It will be interesting to see over the course of the next few weeks and months what is actually going to happen with respect to the implementation date of the UDR. Will it be watered down through this new kind of, let's see, what is the name of this? There is a negligible risk, what's called the negligible risk loophole. One of the challenges, I've been doing so many things, one of the challenges with the negligible risk loophole, and for people who don't know, there's a little arrow over here in the toggle. So this is a toggle, you can go like that. The negligible risk hole does a number of things. Perhaps the most egregious thing that it does is there's a carve out, right, as a part of this, which is going to make it possible, again, here is a part of the other proposed amendments, right, which is if you have no risk country status, so you're not at risk of deforestation, right? What it means is that if you have a product which transits through your country, so let's just say that the US is labeled as zero risk country. Maybe not the US because of the current tariff situation. Some other country, Japan. What you can do is you can send your cocoa to Japan from a high risk country, and then all of a sudden it becomes a no risk product. So what's the point? It completely undermines everything that the EUDR was set up to be. So it will be interesting to see, even if it's not delayed, so it's going to go into effect on January 1, 2026, will these other amendments come into effect, right? Which have to do with exemption from key due diligence checks, being subject to reduced enforcement scrutiny, cleared for EU import without full traceability or deforestation risk assessments. There are all sorts of things which are amendments to the current EUDR, which would completely defang it. And tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent over the course of the last couple of years trying to become EUDR compliant. Lots of money has been spent, on people like me, consultants to write about it, lobbyists to lobby about it. It is a complete mess. It's definitely a case of unintended consequences and buyer's remorse. So having gotten through that, right, rant, I suppose, one way to think about it, is let's go take a look at, what are some of the other responses. So there is some pushback on the EUDR. The International Cocoa Initiative says, oh, we're making huge strides on doing better at monitoring and reporting about child labor, even though we haven't got any recommendations on how to solve the root causes, even though we've identified what the root causes are. Certainly, more monitoring and more reporting is not going to solve the root causes. But what are some responses to the future of the cocoa value chain? One of them is GMO, right? So Mars, right, is bets on CRISPR technology to save cocoa from climate chaos. Now, this is not the first time. There have been proposals by Mars or people working for Mars, one of whom was Howard Yana Shapiro, who said, let's just go replace all of the cocoa in West Africa with another variety. So let's move away from the traditional reliance on Amelinado forastero, the dominant varieties that have been planted in that part of the world. Let's move to something which what we've done is um, we've taken our understanding of the cocoa genome to drive breeding, traditional breeding, in a particular direction. So what we've done is we've used our understanding of the genome to drive hybridization experiments. So rather than it taking 51 experiments, which is what it took with CCN 51, right? So Colección Castro Naranjal 51, right? The 51 is this was, Homero Castro's 51st attempt to be able to do this hybrid. Right. So rather than which took decades to do. So if we can use our understanding of the genome, we could take what might take 50 attempts and decades, and we can turn around in a year or two. But what we end up with is a conventionally hybridized tree. Now we might use somatic cell cloning or other techniques to be able to develop huge quantities of seedlings that we can grow very, very quickly. But let's go replace all of the cocoa with conventionally bred, right, trees. Nothing wrong with that, except for now what we've done is we've really got a monoculture. And the only thing worse than a monoculture of ideas is a monoculture in agriculture. It's just really, really bad idea. But one of the things that the proposal by Mars beforehand was who pays for replacing all the trees. There's not enough money in the system. We already have farmers relying on older trees. But if somebody comes along and says, hey, farmer, you have to cut down all your trees, or we're going to do in-place grafting over the course of years, who is going to pay not only for the stock, right, the seedlings, the grafts, whatever it is they're using, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for any reduced productivity while the trees are coming into production? There's no indication in here that replacing all of the cocoa stock in West Africa or the places that are most at risk with CRISPR, GMO. So one of the things we've been talking about for many years is there's no GMO in cocoa in production, which is whether you believe or disbelieve in the potential harms of GMO. One of the challenges here is that monocultures are a bad idea. So if we're going to replace, huge swaths of cocoa for which there is over the course of 100 years or more of growing, right, there's some genetic diversity, right, that has happened as a result of interbreeding, just the natural interbreeding that happens and responses to new kinds of pressures from disease and from insects and from weather, right, to go and say, we have developed one super hybrid that's going to replace all of this, and are they focusing on flavor? I don't know the answer to that question. It's not entirely sure. But if Mars wants to go do this and it wants to pay for them, right? Right. I don't see any reason why using this new technology to develop pilot programs, plantings in various parts of West Africa to see how these things do. I don't see anything wrong with them as long as Mars pays for it, right? If they want to do it, that's fine. But if they're asking the government to pay for it, they're asking NGOs to pay for it, if they're asking you, the customer, to pay for it, well, you're going to anyway if Mars pays for it, right? You're going to, as a customer, you're buying their products is what's providing the income for them to do the research on this. But it is, interesting. What is CRISPR? You can learn a little about it. They again go over what the cocoa crisis is, right? Exacerbated by seasonal demand, The situation has now begun to stabilize with price falling steadily. That's not true. There's still quite a bit of volatility into the market, right? Cocoa markets head to Q3 delicately balanced, with volatility likely to persist. I don't see how this paragraph here, right? The situation has begun to stabilize. Gene editing could be the situation. We believe CRISPR has the potential to improve crops in ways that support and strengthen global supply chain. Our focus is to be transparently and responsibly conduct CRISPR research and plant science that helps crop better adapt to climate change. I don't have a problem with doing that in the lab. I don't have a problem with putting things out in the field to figure out how this is going to work. But I am definitely concerned about right, planting large monocrops, right, and then who is going to pay for this? It's a really, really, really unanswered set of questions which need to be answered. So, hey, Jen, thanks for connecting today. Good to see you. I understand you're in Southern California, Orange County, San Diego. I forget exactly where you are. I'm concerned that companies like Mars will just end up holding IP rights to their strains and put a chokehold on the market like Monsanto does with seeds. Absolutely. That is a risk. And I think that any government who accedes to Mars' request to do large scale planting without demanding that they relinquish IP, right, and say that anybody can take a cocoa pod off a tree, right, and go and plant those seeds somewhere else, right, is doing a huge risk. And, one of the challenge, just stepping back from that a little bit, one of the interesting things about GMO in a crop like corn or soybeans, right, is that you can change the genetics of the crop incredibly quickly because you're planting new seeds year over year. One of the economic deal breakers when it comes to this kind of IP protection in cocoa and things like that is, number one, is that cocoa is pretty promiscuous. You put trees down and then pollen gets either blown by the wind or taken around by little insects, and it can go 3, 4, 5 kilometers away, right? And there's no way you can control flying insects, right? And so you could find your GM cocoa hybridizing with some other non-GMO cocoa, on some neighbor's farm, right, without any deliberate intervention. So that's something to consider. And then because it takes a number of years for the tree to go from a seedling and into productivity, you don't have the sort of economic kind of dynamics which make that kind of IP control in a seed crop as interesting. So again, you're absolutely right, Jen, in bringing it up. It is a risk. And if I were the government of Ghana, if I were the government of any government, I would say that if Mars is going to pay to supply, or we're going to buy genetic material from Mars, that they need to relinquish IP rights. We have seen the damage that it does in corn and soy and other crops. And we should be very, very careful, but very, very mindful of that. Oh, here, a quick shout out to Chef Jeffrey and his great chocolate making work. Need to revisit the shop again very soon. Absolutely. I was, what was the last time I was in California? December of 2022, I think. I was visiting with Stan, my friend who runs SoCal Co-Packing, and I had the opportunity to spend part of an afternoon. Chef Gardner drove into not quite Malibu, but near the airport somewhere. I forget exactly where. So LAX, from his shop in Torrance. And we sat down and talked. He gave me a whole bunch of chocolate, and I had a chance to taste it for the first time in quite some time. I mean, I remember, if I recall correctly, that they got their start in Manhattan Beach before moving to Torrance. I don't really remember if that's in fact true. Chef, you can let us know a little bit more about that history if you want, right? So that's, a huge and interesting question there, which is GM, are genetically modified crops the future of cocoa? Is this what it's going to do? The answer is maybe. But as Jin points out, there's an IP problem, and then there's the who's going to pay for it, which is another which is another problem. Another article, this is also from Confectionery News, saying where will the cocoa supply of the future come from? And the answer to that question here is actually looking at geography. Right? So there has been a huge reliance historically, this is over the past 40, 50 years, since the 1970s, late 1970s particularly, right, is that there's been this focus on Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, in part because the Ghanaian and Ivorian governments have put a lot of focus on growing that sector of their economy. Right next door, Nigeria and Cameroon have advantages because their economies are not controlled. And so their farmers can go and take advantage of the higher prices and invest in their farms and invest in productivity and take lands that might have been converted to pasture lands. So they were deforested prior to the 2020 deadline, which is a part of the EUR. They can try to rehabilitate those pasture lands, turn them into cocoa farms. So in Nigeria and Cameroon, because they are, and Togo and Liberia and Sierra Leone, other countries which are in the cocoa belt, do have some economic advantage in terms of their market systems. They're not monopsonies to be able to address the crisis. So maybe instead of this global focus on Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, other actors, right? Nigeria and Cameroon, we have Indonesia, and Malaysia, other big suppliers. We saw that the government of Vietnam made a huge investment in coffee farming and went from a nowhere producer to the third largest producer of commodity coffee in the world within a decade. There's no reason why a government couldn't decide to make that investment in their cocoa economy and just rise up, right, to take up the shortfall. It is going to take some time. It is going to take years in order to be able to do that. But we've seen Ecuador and Brazil and Peru step up in the last decade. So we're going to, will the balance of production shift back to the original producing countries? It's quite possible, right? Right. Instead of cocoa swollen shoot virus, we have things like witch's broom, right? There's Monilia. There are other diseases, different diseases that we have to deal with. And expansion to new areas, less by cost pressure in West Africa, has the potential to lead to more deforestation. Absolutely. Always going to be a problem. But, right, there is a lot of previously deforested land in the Mata Atlântica. So over the past, since the late 1980s, what used to be the Atlantic rainforest has been converted to pasture land for cattle. And there's lots of heavily degraded pasture lands which could be rehabilitated, right, and turned into cocoa farming, moving to a much higher density and, surprisingly enough, lower total impact cattle farming regime. Or there are ways to accommodate this. So it could lead to more deforestation, but it could actually lead to less, right, if done properly, right? So again, other African countries could be better for farmers. Will Latin America, will it be the future? Will it be the future of cocoa? Right? Is there a risk of deforestation? If the EUDR is not gutted, the answer is there's a risk, but I don't think it's a risk that we would need to pay much attention to. But maybe this is one of the reasons why the EUDR is having its fangs pulled, right? So to make running away from the mess that it created in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire easier, maybe. I wouldn't put it past some people in some companies to think that way. That how do we go and abandon our responsibilities to the cocoa farmers that we've been exploiting for the last couple of generations? Let's just run away, Monty Python, I believe, run away and go someplace else. So here's another short-term impact on the cost of cocoa. The cocoa shortage reshapes recipes and what counts as chocolates. And what we're doing is we're finding that the big chocolate brands, not all of them, but many of the big chocolate brands, right, are moving away from the use of cocoa butter. And by moving away from the use of cocoa butter, what they do is they've not just reformulated their products, but they are literally creating products that can no longer be labeled as chocolate. So Nestle and Pladis are two companies that are in the top 10 in terms of the global largest snack and confectionery companies. Cargill and Barry Callebaut are not listed in the candy industry top 100 because they're not retail brands, right? They're suppliers to retail brands. And so they're exploring alternatives to broaden options, but not to eliminate cocoa. What does that mean? There's another article about that. So replacing cocoa can trigger compliance issues with EU chocolate directives. That's what we've been talking about going on with Nestle and Platties. But importantly, don't expect labeling laws to relax. Regulators have shown limited flexibility, even during crises like the Ukraine war. So there is a legal minimum for the amount of cocoa paste, or chocolate liquor that can be in a milk chocolate or a sweet chocolate. There are minimum and maximum amounts of cocoa butter that can be in milk chocolate and white chocolate and things like that. You can't label a product chocolate in the United States if it has any fat other than cocoa butter in it. So if you want to replace the cocoa butter with a palm kernel fraction, it's now chocolate flavored, right? Or something else, but it can't legally be labeled as chocolate. So we've got a whole bunch of interlocking regulations which have been developed over the course of the last 100 years. I mean, the interesting thing about this is the UK is where some of the first few purity laws were in fact enacted, and in part chocolate as a driver for those few food purity laws, where people were replacing cocoa powder with things like rust, right? So iron oxide, because it was the right color, right? And other things like pea flour as bulking agents, right? So the drive for purity laws and labeling and regulation on what is and is not chocolate has its roots in late 1800s the UK, in terms of trying to combat counterfeiting in cocoa and chocolate. But so the news, let's say, Nestle and Plattis were forced to drop the word chocolate from their white chocolate Kit Kats and digestifs after cocoa butter levels dipped below the UK's legal minimum, right? So the news rattled fans. So yeah, majors are giving attention to alternatives. So, Cargill pumped $35 million into new chocolate reducing facilities, right? And so here's my thought. Rather than this is just one company, and this is just one project. So rather than spending hundreds of millions of dollars looking for cocoa replacement, why not spend those hundreds of millions of dollars to improve the lives and livelihoods of farmers, to go and address the problems on the farm, right? That would be a better place, in my opinion, to spend the hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, that are being spent on industry to find alternatives to cocoa, running away from their obligations to address the problems that they have caused by generations of a lack of systemic investment in their farms and farmers. So as a scientific perspective, looking at cell culturing, looking at precision fermentation, looking at all those techniques, I'm a fan just from the science of it. But giving big chocolate companies, big cocoa companies, an off ramp, right, that says we no longer need to rely on our cocoa farmers, right, and therefore we're just going to stop buying from them, right, and we're not going to do anything to pay for the mess we caused, right, over the past 50, 60, 70 years, is morally reprehensible, right? Just so, right? But it is to go look at this and think about it. Cocoa shortage reshapes recipe and what counts as chocolate. This is a misleading headline. It is not reshaping what counts as chocolate. Legislation regarding what chocolate is and what chocolate is not, that is not changing yet, right? It may be that, I think Barry Callebaut spent 5 years trying to get Ruby, right? Get a temporary marketing exemption for Ruby chocolate. I don't think there's any interest whatsoever of the industry going and pressuring the FDA and say, please, 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 add a new standard of identity for Ruby chocolate. I don't think there's industry support for something like that because, of the IP issue. Jen, speaking about IP, the IP control that Callebaut has exerted over Ruby chocolate, there aren't a whole lot of fans out there to say, let's make this, a legal new category of chocolate. Um, but it has not changed what counts as chocolate. So you have to be very careful about looking at the headlines, because no, right? If the cocoa liquor content drops below a certain level, if the cocoa butter content drops below a certain level, in the UK, if it's like the US, but in the EU, you can have up to 5% non-cocoa butter fats and still label it as chocolate, as long as you disclose the fact that there are non-cocoa butter fats in the ingredient list. So that's part of the legislation. That's not likely to change anytime soon, I hope. Right. And again, this is a point. If you're a Mars, you're Mondelez, you're Meiji, you're Hershey, you're any of these companies, and you're spending a dime lobbying the FDA to change the standards of identity for chocolate, that's immoral. And you should be spending every single penny of lobbying dollars, right, on your farms, and to compensate your farmers, right, to go and fix the damage that has been caused over the last 50 years. Do not. I mean, it's just morally reprehensible, in my opinion, for you to go and do that, right? And I think that next to last is I wanted to talk about, right, top brands, because we have just a couple of minutes left. So this is an article, again, over the course of the last couple of issues of Confectionery News, the top most valuable food brands of 2025. And what we find is that globally, right, the brand with the most brand value in 2025, right, it's gone down just a little bit, but it's still the biggest one, is Nestle, right? And Nestle is in the top 10 of candy industry's snack and confectionery brands. Kellogg's, Kellanova, right? They're in the process of being purchased. Lindt, again, another Lindt and Sprüngli, another top 10 brand. So we have these really, really large companies, lots of brand value, right? Right. And, brand rating, consumers think really, really highly of them, right? But they're not really, 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 right. For companies that have been systematically, many of these are signatories to the Harkin-Engel Protocol. If they're not signatories to the Harkin-Engel Protocol, they are supporters of the International Cocoa Initiative and other initiatives which are designed to reduce deforestation, improve sustainability. They might be on top of restorative agriculture, regenerative agriculture programs. They might be involved in programs which are designed to reduce the incidence of illegal labor, not just of all kinds, not just child labor, in the cocoa supply chain, right? Why they have such brand ratings, such high, I don't understand. Where, oh, we support child labor, we support slavery, right? Why doesn't it take their brand rating from A to D minus? I don't understand. I don't understand it. But they're big companies. They got a lot of money to spend on marketing and on what I would think of as greenwashing. Support the ICI. Given the 2024 annual report on the members things, nothing but greenwashing, in my opinion. That's all it is, right? Right. And they've got a lot of work to do to convince me otherwise. Hey, if you're involved at the ICI, you're in Geneva, you're at the Secretariat, whatever it is that you want to call it, and you want to get on an episode of Pod Safe Chocolate and show me where I am wrong and why I am wrong, this is an open invitation. If anybody knows anybody at ICI at the senior level, at the head office in Geneva, or anything like that, and you can convince them to get on an interview, I will give them as much time as they want, right, to sit down and talk with me. Provide me with the receipts, right? It's going to be a part of it. Just don't talk to me, right? Don't be an apologist. Don't be an excusagist for what you're doing, right? Don't tell me, more monitoring, right, and more reporting is going to solve illegal child labor. That's not, because you're not addressing the root causes, right? If I'm wrong, show me where I'm wrong. I really, really want to know. And then finally, as we close out, right, I've got the main site on the Chocolate Life, but we also have the Chocolate Life forums. The Chocolate Life forums is a place where if you want to self-post around classifieds for smaller equipment, this is a Chocolate Life member called Eric. He's in the Netherlands. He's got some equipment that he wants to sell. So here's a classified about the equipment that he's looking to sell. You can go take a look at that. And he's also posted about some chocolate making books. He's got a copy of Beckett, and a couple of other really interesting ones that are available along with prices. And so this is a way to take a look at the Chocolate Life forums. If you have higher ticket classifieds, I am happy to go and curate them and publish them for you and publish them on the Chocolate Life and promote them. And that's it for today. There's one addition I'm going to make. I'm going to put an additional chart in the futures overview here to barchart.com. But otherwise, that's the end of the episode. We're at an hour. I want to thank everybody who's watched me today. I want to thank all the members of the Chocolate Life who through their support as free members or premium members have made the Chocolate Life possible, who make the Chocolate Life possible, and who make Pod Save Chocolate possible. This episode is for you. I want to thank Chef Gardner. I want to thank Jen for their contributions to today's episodes. It's really appreciated. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life. Let me go and see through my light right here. Yay, there we are. All right, and just a quick notice that this coming Sunday, the 17th of August, is the monthly all-member AMA call. All right, so if you're a member of the Chocolate Life, I make myself available for 90 minutes, usually on the third Sunday of every month, for you to get on a Google Meet call and ask me anything you want. You want to ask me a question about your business, you want to ask you a question about how to solve a technical problem, you're looking for something, you can get on the call. We can spend 5 minutes, we can spend 90 minutes. I've had fabulous conversations with Chocolate Life members, both free and premium members, over the course of the last couple of years. The login information, how to go contact, if you go to the August 2025 member newsletter, you have to be a subscriber of the Chocolate Life. You have to be a member. You have to be signed in order to be able to look at this. But you'll scroll down, and there is a link to join the video call on this coming Sunday, right? So starting at 11 a.m., it's for 90 minutes. So 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time to 12:30 Pacific Daylight Time this coming Sunday. And again, here is an example. This is a copy of Beckett's Industrial Chocolate Manufacture and Use. It's a fabulous book. I can't recommend it more highly. If you don't have a copy, I have a copy in storage. I was very lucky. Stephen Beckett. There are other books, but it is one of the great. Menifee is another one you can go take a look at and go work for. And that, I just want to say again, thanks everybody for being here. It's been a pleasure. I will be back this coming Friday. I don't have a topic for Friday's episode yet. It may be around judging. I'm getting ready to judge the Premio Bean de Bar Brasil. This coming weekend is Bean de Bar Week in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I had hoped to be there. I would actually need to be on a plane right now if I was going to be there. So unfortunately, that's not happening. But I'm going to be joining. I'm going to be judging the Premio this coming Friday. No, in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be sent the judging samples. But I'm right in the middle of judging the Ecuadorian Cacao Innovation Awards, where the winners are going to be announced and their products are going to be shared at a special reception in Paris during the Salon de Chocolat at the end of October and early November. And it's been a really interesting judging process. So the rubric was not created by me. I didn't have any input into it. And so I'm judging these things in a way that is not necessarily the way that I would have thought about judging an innovation awards, but it's fun, it's interesting. And there are bunches of interesting products, not just chocolate bars. There's some cosmetics, which is fun. So I've been, working on putting, lotions on me and soap. There is some really interesting balsamic style cacao reduction. And there are just lots of interesting stuff that's a part of it, in addition to more traditional chocolate bars and things like that. So I may talk about the judging process that's coming Friday. I'm not going to actually talk about judging individual products. They've asked me not to talk about that, but talking about the judging process. It's something that I think I can do, because thinking about judging chocolate, it's something that evolves over time. And it's something that I enjoy doing, and it's something that I enjoy thinking about. With that, that's it for today. Thanks everybody for joining me. And a quick reminder as we close out today, which is if you're working with chocolate, and you're not having fun, right? You're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.